justice may be easily imagined, but as Malaysians, we can all agree that it is not always easy to attain. This is for the simple reason that different communities will have different definitions of justice. Even when and if a common definition is agreed upon, different communities will have different sources, narrative, and priorities of justice. Nowhere is this truer than in the case of religion. It is to explore some of the commonalities and divergences across different faiths that we are gathered here today. We aim not only to better understand how different faith traditions understand and explore their aspirations for a just world, but how this is relevant for bringing Malaysians together. Without further ado, let us welcome our moderator to introduce us, our panelists today. Please put your hands together for Boon Kia Meng, academician at Taylor's College and active member of Friends in Conversation.
Good afternoon to all. I would like to invite our respective speakers to take their positions, but I will introduce them one by one. First of all, we have our speaker from, how should I say, Saudara N. Surendran, who's the Vice President of Parti Keadilan Rakyat, who's also a very active human rights lawyer. Secondly, we have Reverend Herman Shastri from the Council of Churches of Malaysia. Then we have Mr. T.K. Lee, who is the Director of the Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'i. And lastly, we have Saudara Ahmad Fuad Rahmat, who is a political theorist with the Islamic Renaissance Front. I think it's better that I migrate there as well. I'm just going to make some introductory remarks before we begin our discussion. Project Dialogue is inspired by a sense of wanting to allow different segments of our community, in this case different faith communities, the chance to come together and explore certain issues where we find is of common concern. And we want to move away from rehashing the old formulas or the settled answers that we are so used to. And today is our first attempt to do so, and want to move away from a more traditional format of a forum. And to do that, we will not have what we usually see in most forums, which is one speaker after another presenting their positions on their paper. But I've been asked to play a more proactive role in this forum, in putting forward certain suggested directions of how the conversation should go. So if the directions are in any way biased or centered on certain issues, I'm fully responsible for that, not the organizers. So I think, yeah, that's what I want to say as a point of departure for our conversation. And usually, and just reveal a bit of my biases, as I said. I come from the Christian faith tradition, so there might be certain things that may color the things that I would put forward. But I just want to share a contemporary observation. It's very common in America, especially with the dominance of the evangelical Christian right. You will see a lot of car bumper stickers of Christian content, and one of them is usually emblazoned in the words of Jesus is the answer, right? But I think a quick requip would be, but what is the question? So there's a lot of false assumptions that we really have ready answers for. So today we want to capture the moment where when we look at faith, not so much of packaging answers, but about a deep sincerity in investigating what are the common problems and issues that we are struggling with within our respective faith communities. So in that sense, we will steer away from rehashing our common dogmas, but we will try to capture that lively moment where each of our speakers will try to share from their personal lives, from their personal take of what actually their faith represents in the public sphere. So to begin, the first thing maybe I want to bring up for our panel, just to break the ice. Justice is a very big word. It's protein with different layers of meaning. So what comes to your mind when you think of the word justice, especially the connections it may have with your particular faith tradition? So I would put this question to Reverend Herman, but we will take responses of each person as we go along.
Let me thank the organizers for extending this invitation to me, and I truly welcome this opportunity of dialogue, and I feel honored to be in the midst of learned panelists here, and I hope that this engagement here will really cause us to reflect on many angles as to this theme from an interfaith perspective. And this is so necessary today, because sometimes in the dialogue we are just talking over the heads of each other and not really coming to the core of the issues that point to our common humanity, because that is the point. Finally, whatever we say from our faith perspective, one thing is for sure and one thing is constant in our life's experience, and that is we live among people. We live among human beings. We live among people who have certain beliefs. We live among people who are shaped by their cultures and by their histories and by their nations. And the religion that we profess must take into consideration all the challenges that come from it. So the chairman has asked me this very direct question: justice, maybe you could say fullness of life. Fullness of life for all human beings. And we can answer or give a response to the meaning of fullness of life from many angles, but one of it basically coming from my own Christian tradition, fullness of life for all would mean that a human being who is created by God deserves to live a life on earth where that human being can discover his or her full potential, from a physical, from a spiritual, and from a material point of view. I do not want to say more, but I'm sure we can raise questions on that point. But I just use this word, fullness of life.
I have Sarah Surendran.
Thank you, Boon. Good afternoon to everyone. I'm glad that so many of you have made it here on this hot afternoon. I hope there are not too many others who are still lost on the other building, because I noticed practically everyone had to go there and then come over here. And quite a task considering the size of both buildings and the distances involved. That question that was posed a moment ago, that's quite a fraught question, because when you talk about the word justice, and you begin to unpack it, the nuances, the variety of meanings, the issues that arise, these have been pondered over, I think, not for decades but for centuries, by all kinds of philosophers and thinkers, much more able than myself. I, of course, have got absolutely no scholarly knowledge of justice and the attendant concepts. What I can share with you today, however, is what I have picked up banging around the dusty courtrooms of this country for well over 2 decades. I think something has rubbed off, but I must say that whatever bright-eyed ideas that I had about justice when I came out of law school have all but disappeared after 2 decades of running around our courthouses. Indeed, it is poles apart, so far apart that it's almost as if I was in another planet at that point of time. But yeah, to me, if you talk about justice, whether it's legal justice or just justice as a concept, it has to be something, it has to have a component of fairness. I don't think in this day and age most people go in for the eye for an eye concept of justice. That sort of rigor, I think, has died out, or I hope so. But you know, when you talk about justice, it has to have within it a component not just of fairness but mercy and passion. And that's the kind of justice I think that I would want to see, and I think most people feel in tune with. I think a lot of the time we feel that there's just too much rigor, but I think I'm going on too long. I think that will do. Thank you.
Okay. Can I have Fuad?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you, Kiaming. Thank you also to the other panelists for making it here today to explore together a very, very important topic that we face as Malaysians. I don't think I have much more to add to Brother Surendran's answer and Reverend Herman's answers. I think they're quite comprehensive. Although I do want to put a little emphasis on the Islamic perspective, which sees justice very much linked to the concept of Tawhid. Right? So Tawhid, we think of Tawhid as a theological commitment, but it's more than that. It's actually a commitment to a united society. Right? That means we want to see oneness and not division in society. Right? And what this entails, first and foremost, is that justice must be dedicated towards correcting what is wrong. Right? And the narrative and history of the Prophet, peace be upon him, was primarily that struggle. Right? To end oppression, to liberate the poor, to liberate women, and to liberate unjust victims of wrongdoing. Another thing that also comes to mind when the word justice is uttered is the sheer difficulty of attaining justice. Right? Because things have to change. Right? Power will have to be put in the right hands, differences will have to be equalized, wealth possibly redistributed. These things do not settle well with everybody. Because most people, especially Malaysians, we can relate to this, most people are comfortable in their privileges, most people are comfortable in their middle class comforts. Right? So to think that things might change is actually a very, very daunting realization. Right? And as we can gather and deduce from the recent events in the Arab Spring, that things, when we want justice, things often has to get a little bit worse before we can get better. Right? So there's this, underneath the cry for justice, a kind of existential pang, for lack of a better word, right? That if we want what's right, there's always a price. And personally, as a Muslim, faith becomes a resource for which I feel more empowered, I feel more directed, and I feel more clearer about working towards fighting for a more just state of affairs. So on one hand, it's difficult because it's not very popular. On the other hand, it's also difficult because it's always a process, right? So there's unjust treatment of women, there's injustices in the economic sphere, there's injustices in the environmental sphere. So there are many layers of injustices that must be met with correction, that must be met with the right action. And this cannot be done by one people, cannot be done by one religion or one ethnicity. This is something that everybody must come together as a collective effort to share their visions, whether it is drawn out of cultural commitments, religious commitments, justice because it's difficult, justice because it's a never-ending struggle requires solidarity across differences. So those things come to mind when I hear the word, along with the definitions that we've referred previously.
Thank you, Fuad. Mr. TKV.
Yeah, good afternoon. I want to lengthen what the expressions sentiments made by my fellow panelists here. Same sentiments I have got. It's really wonderful that I'm here, and thank you for being here, spending your afternoon, Sunday afternoon, just to listen to us. This justice is a universal principle. So when I look at the board saying that faith and justice, conflict and convergence, I think it's a false dichotomy. Because faith is what we have, and the justice is the quality of the soul. But as mankind evolves, remember the days of even Muhammad, in the days of Muhammad, to have a slave is normal in society, so it's quite just. Until the time in the 19th century where Abraham Lincoln came and he brought his country to war just on the one principle, that you can't have slavery, it's not just. So when civilization evolved up to down to the 20th century, you'll find that over the past, say about recorded history of 10,000 years, the justice has evolved to a loftier and loftier ideal in order to compensate with the advancement of humanity. And today, we say that the purpose of justice, in the Baha'i writings say that the purpose of justice is the appearance of unity amongst men. And when you look at itself that, you can't bring about justice where there's no unity of humanity, where we do not treat each other as one. Then how can you allow, for example, poverty to exist? Oh, well, this is part of society and it's part of human nature. It's wrong. It's not just at all. So we have to look at this concept whereby if we were to view ourselves as one members of one family, then justice can be done. At a personal level, justice is the best beloved of all things in our sight. And we have to use our eyes and to search for knowledge of our own self, and not through the knowledge of others, other knowledge, but ourselves independently. At the group level, when you come for a decision, justice will prevail. If we don't have justice, then we will be interested in our own interest parties. My interest against your interest. But if justice is the dominant factor in the decision processes, we will find that whatever decision has made is the good for humanity and for the society. Thank you.